PSBA is a 501(c), and everyone involved is a volunteer, and all the more reason to join the board if you like, or come to a board meeting to see if that's what you feel like participating in further. You can, all members are welcome to the meetings. And we do have one board meeting on the slate coming up, which I better announce to members. So if people do want to join us, they can, since of course it will be on probably this, not Zoom, but Microsoft Teams. Okay, so thanks. Let's enjoy the meeting together. Turn it over to Tracy.
Alrighty, I see that Jeff has joined and the recording started, so I'll go ahead and present my screen. And so if you guys could save your questions till the end or add them to the chat, Jeff will be monitoring those. And while I'm presenting, I can't see the chat, but as soon as we get done, I'll turn the presentation off so I can see the chat too, and we'll make sure and answer all your questions before we're done tonight. All right, so tonight's going to be all about setting up to be ready for the winter. Kit, thank you for the title. That's awesome. All right, so those of you that have joined us before, this should be a very familiar slide. I've moved the arrow over to nearly October 1st, where we are now. And guess what gets in the way of winter and fall survival? Yep, that's Varroa mites. And the Varroa mites right now are outgrowing the new bee population. That's why we've reached this inflection point where Varroa is going up and bees are going down, and that's when the paralytic viruses set in. So if you see a whole bunch of bees crawling around on the ground outside your colony and they're kind of herky-jerky, or they don't fly, or maybe some of them have deformed wing virus, that's a really good sign that says you should have treated. And you didn't, and it might be too late. But hopefully you can get on it if that's happening to you, if you haven't treated yet, or at least measured your mites and do something about it. So our options right now for controlling enemy number one are, the best three right now are oxalic acid, Apigard, or Formic Pro / Mite Away Quick Strips. It's getting a little long in the year to use Apigard. It does need a little bit warmer temperatures, but it's not too late. The rate limiting factor, it seems like this year, is getting the materials that you need from the bee supply places, since it seems like everybody's on back order. So make sure that if you haven't tested for mites yet, you go ahead and either do an alcohol wash or a sugar shake. Count up the number of mites you have, and if it's more than 2%, you have the power right now to do something, but act quickly. All right, enough about Varroa mites. What are some other fall bee pests? Number one is those pesky yellow jackets, and their colonies are maxing right now, and they're hungry, and so they love to attack beehives and get nice juicy bees as well as larvae, and they can actually take your colony down in only a couple hours if there's a lot of them. So the picture on the right hand side there is one of my colonies that has what's called a robbing screen on it. Notice that the front entrance, the very front, is closed, and there's an entrance above that blue tape that the bees can get into. Bonus points for anyone that realizes what's missing in this photo.
A lid.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know why I took this picture without a lid, but I did. And well, I pasted it in here and then I was too lazy to put a lid on it. So I could take another picture. So it is missing a lid. Not a good idea to leave it like that, especially now that it started to rain. All right, and so over on the left-hand side, I know lots of people live up in the highlands and in areas where there might be bears. So if you have apple trees or beehives, the bears are fattening up for the winter right now. And you'll notice that, well, it kind of looks like a junkyard when the bear gets done. And thank goodness a couple years ago in October, we had a big early windstorm. And I remembered that I had left my beehives at our cabin without weights on the lid. So I drove all the way over there to put weights on the lid the day before the windstorm so that they wouldn't blow over. And I discovered that the bear had gone through my electric fence and had helped himself to 2 of the 4 beehives up there. And you know what they say about moving your beehives 2 feet or 2 miles? Well, that night, as it was getting dark and starting to pour down rain and the windstorm was coming in early, I grabbed those other 2 colonies and moved them down into the dog kennel with the other ones and said, sorry, girls, I hope you find your way home when you leave tomorrow, if it stops raining. And believe it or not, those 2 colonies lived, and I took them apart box by box in the pouring down rain as it was getting dark, and I put them in there in that dog kennel with the other ones. Note that the dog kennel has 6 strands of hot wire around it, and so far, knock on wood, the bear has left them alone. I hope it stays that way. All right, so what to do with your colonies? Right now is a really good time to take your supers off. If you haven't removed them yet, now's the time to do it. And you want to reduce down to, if you run deeps, you want to reduce down to 2 deeps, or if you have all mediums, you want 3 medium boxes. And the bees should all fit, even if it's nice and cozy right now, not to worry. They'll be fine because remember the population is continuing to decline. You want to reduce down to those boxes that you're going to have for the winter. And the bees should be backfilling the top with honey. And if you still have brood in the top boxes, that's no big deal. But as that brood hatches out, the bees will backfill that with honey, and they'll start moving the queen down lower and lower in the boxes. If your colony isn't pretty heavy right now with, say, 70 or more pounds of honey, you want to be feeding them 2 to 1 sugar. That's 2 parts sugar and 1 part water. And however you want to measure that is up to you. Jeff, if you can mute everybody, that'd be great. Thank you. So you want to make sure that you're feeding 2 to 1 parts of sugar to water. And right now that does take heating the water up. You don't want to scorch the sugar though. So I found that the easiest thing to do is to heat the water to boiling and then add the sugar and then let it cool before you put it onto a beehive, obviously, because those bees aren't smart enough not to go burn themselves, much like us. And so I always make sure and let it cool down to outside temperature first. And then in October, you want to, which is coming right around the corner, if the bees aren't all moved down to the bottom, then you want to go ahead on a nice warm day, open the boxes up, move all the frames with brood down into the bottom 1 or 2 boxes if you've got mediums, have that nice honey arch on the top and then all honey over that, or empty frames. And those empty frames will be there for them to fill up with sugar syrup if you're adding that right now. I don't recommend feeding pollen patties anymore because you want your bees to be reducing the numbers. If you keep feeding pollen patties, what will happen is they'll keep producing brood way too late in the season. And you want to have a good number of winter bees, but you don't want to have too many because then what will happen is they'll eat through their food too fast. All right, so some other fall considerations. It's a really good idea to unite small colonies. So if you're not an experienced or advanced beekeeper, having a 3 or 4 frame nucleus right now probably isn't going to be successful going into the spring. So you're better off combining those small colonies with larger colonies, or combine 2 healthy small colonies together into a regular sized one. You can also, if you've got, if you don't have 2 boxes of bees right now, if you have deeps, it's okay to overwinter in 1 deep. And I've got a picture of a couple of those later on. And Rusty Burlew, that writes the Honeybee Suite, she overwintered with most of hers in single deeps. So you're fine with that, especially if you have carniolans. They overwinter in smaller clusters than the Italians do. I think that's one of the reasons why they overwinter better here, is because they have fewer bees to feed over the whole winter. So it's better to combine those colonies now, get one strong colony through the winter, and then split in the spring and either buy a queen or let them raise a new one when it's warm enough and there's drones out. So right now, I mentioned this earlier, you should have a robbing screen on, especially if you have yellow jackets. Consider using a mouse guard if you don't have that, or if you live in a rural area where there's lots of mice. I already kicked out 2 mice from my spare empty box at the cabin. They had already taken up residence in my empty box. And so they got evicted last weekend and the mouse guard went on. The other thing that I recommend, you notice in the top picture, there's that lead weight on the top. I used to be a scuba instructor, and so I've got a lot of lead weights laying around. That's a 10-pound lead scuba weight. They work great. If you don't have those, patio pavers work, or tie-down straps are awesome. And then we'll talk about this in a little bit, but make sure that you do have an upper entrance. It's easier for your bees over the winter to take cleansing flights, and it importantly increases the air circulation. So if you look in this green box in the top, this is just a feeder shim, and there's a hole in the middle, and that's the upper entrance. And you'll see why that's important in a couple slides. And then finally, add a moisture quilt. They make a huge difference in your winter survival. So that feeding shim is down below there. That way in the winter, if the bees are all up in the top and I open that up and I look in there, the bees are in the top and there's no more food, I just slide food in there, close the box, and I'm done. All right, and here's an example of a moisture quilt that I recently made. They're easy peasy if you're even remotely handy with tools. Just takes a little bit of 1x4 lumber, the same dimensions as the outside of your bee box. 1/8-inch hardware cloth to cover the holes. Aluminum window screen I found works great for the bottom. I tried using landscape fabric one year, and don't do that because when the bees come up in there, some of them get tangled up in the landscaping fabric, and I felt bad because there was a whole bunch of dead ones in there that had gotten tangled up over the winter and died. And then wood glue, and then staples to staple the hardware cloth on, and nails to staple it all together. All right, and then to insulate or not to insulate. Believe it or not, those 2 photos are of my stand in my backyard, February 2019 and February 2018. Almost exactly the same date. So everybody that was here a couple years ago remembers the epic snow that we had that lasted forever. So this is one of the reasons why it's really important to have an upper entrance. You notice all this snow stacked up here on the bottom? Are the bees able to get out through the entrance reducers? No, but they were able to get out and take cleansing flights through these top holes. And believe it or not, on sunny afternoons, even in all that snow, they were getting out and taking cleansing flights. So it's important to make sure that you not only use that for the air quality and ventilation effect, but so that the bees can go out and go to the bathroom. And then on the right-hand side, I tried using painter's tape to cover up the cracks so there wasn't any holes and extra air getting through. And I'm not going to do that again. It was kind of a pain in the butt, but it was an experiment that I ran last year. And note that I have really fancy weights. I've got scuba weights, a rock, a patio paver, and up here on the top, you can see this little black thing. That's a rat trap because I live in town and the rats love to come and pull my entrance reducers and sticky boards out in the winter and eat all the dead bees, which I'm fine with them eating all the dead bees if they just leave the entrance reducers and the sticky boards in, but they didn't. So they got dead instead. So to insulate or not to insulate on the west side of the mountains, and really on the east side of the mountains too, there's no reason or necessity to wrap your hives. In fact, I think on our side of the mountains that the people that wrap their hives actually have a higher mortality rate because I think it stays wetter inside their colonies, and it's the wet that kills the bees as opposed to the cold here. So there's no need to wrap your hives. rigid insulation inside the telescoping lids helps immensely keep the moisture down inside the colony and helps keep the air a little bit warmer inside. And people ask me all the time, what is rigid insulation? So I just took a shot of a sheet that I bought the other day. They do come in 4x8 sheets though. So if you have friends that are beekeepers, you might all want to split a sheet. They're not very expensive, but what the heck do you do with all that extra if you don't have a lot of colonies? And then I replaced the sticky boards, my screen bottoms in November-ish when I put the feeder shims and the moisture quilts on. That way it helps the bees keep a little bit warmer, especially in February when they start raising brood again. It's not quite so hard for them to heat up their little brood area. And then the weights or tie down straps were great too, because then it compresses the colony together and helps close up any of those cracks that are in there. And then finally, equipment storage. What do you do with all your extra stuff? Well, I practically need a garage to keep it all in, but some tips that I've learned over the years that I'll share with you. A 5-gallon bucket with one of those twist-on lids works great to take out into your apiary and store your hive tool and stuff in. I have found though that even though they have a gasket in the lid, that they do leak a little bit of water. So put that underneath a porch when it's pouring down rain. Otherwise, you'll end up with a little bit of water in the bottom of your bucket. And then you need a spot to put all your cleaned up feeders and extra supers and frames, all that. On the liquid feeders, the bees won't take the liquid syrup after average daytime temps get down to below 55. So any syrup that you have left over when that happens, then what I usually do is just take that off and freeze it for the winter. And then I'll dilute it to 1-to-1 syrup and put it back on the colonies in the spring. You can, next month, we'll talk about dry feeding and how to make candy boards. So winter storage for your extracted supers. I've got some regular garbage bags here. I found that using the big lawn and leaf bags works a lot better because it covers the whole box. And then this year, I don't know about you guys, but wax moths have been more of a problem this year in my apiary than any other year that I remember. So I'm actually taking the extra step of freezing all of my honey super frames for a day or two. And then I'm putting them in the big lawn and leaf bags. And then not so practical here, but like down in California, they store their super frames somewhere that's light and outside and airy so the wax moths don't get at them so much. And then whatever you do, do not use. And I realized I used all caps here on purpose. Don't use mothballs. They're toxic to your bees and you can't air it out. So if you make a mistake and you use mothballs in your supers, you'll kill your bees next spring. And then if you think, well, I'll air them out in the summer and put them on the following year, it'll kill your bees then too. So it's a total waste of your resources if you accidentally use mothballs. You can never put them back on the beehive. There is something called paradichlorobenzene that's available from beekeeping stores and that you can use. So if you decide that you want to use some sort of repellent for the moths, then that's the stuff to get. And with that, I'll end the presentation and we'll go to questions. And if you're too shy to ask, then you can feel free to type something in the chat.
I'm a first-year beekeeper and I have a question about all 3 of my hives. I had a swarm back in June and was able to catch it thanks to Jeff, which was awesome. And he did give the suggestion to go in and look for any queen cells and find the strongest one and leave that. That didn't happen. And then basically to fast forward, that the original hive is now queenless. I went in there just this last Sunday and saw that there are now multiple eggs per cell. So I'm guessing that they have a laying worker. based on my internet research. And I was planning to combine that hive with the swarmed hive that it originated from. And then I went and looked in that hive and saw that the queen is still existing within that, in the swarmed hive, but I now see that that queen, I would say like the 2 to 5% of the cells that I saw her laying eggs in had multiple eggs, which was very confusing to me. And so I'm not sure if she's healthy, happy. I don't know what's going on. And so now I'm wondering if maybe if I should remove that queen and combine the swarmed hive with my other unaffected normal hive and let the hive with the potential laying worker to die. I'm not sure what to do.
Okay, great questions. So a laying worker hive is one where they'll, at this point in time, I can let you know they're not going to accept a new queen. And most of the time, even after you work really hard, there's some ways maybe to get them to accept a laying queen. But at this point in time, what I would do is I would just go as far away as I can from the other 2 colonies on your property and shake all those bees out. Shake all those bees out and then let them beg for admittance in your other colony.
Okay.
Okay. What to do with the other one? So that is weird that that queen is laying multiple eggs. A newly fertilized queen will do that for a little while, but not usually for very long. So she's been in there for a while. I'm going to say there's probably something the matter with her, and it wouldn't be a bad idea to go ahead and kill her and then do a newspaper combine on the other 2.
Okay.
With the other one.
Okay, great. That was more or less my plan. So thank you for.
Yeah. I mean, your other option is you can still buy a queen and put a new queen in there, but it just kind of depends on how many bees are in there.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right, so Michael asked, I noticed that you put vent holes in your quilt box. Are they necessary or just nice? They're actually necessary because that helps with the airflow, and then it also helps dry the chips out. So I almost never have to put new chips. And by the way, I just use whatever cheap rabbit chips are available at the pet store in there. And so use that, but the vent holes are necessary. Do you put anything in the shallow frame that you built? Mary Sue asks, and the answer is sometimes. So for my colonies that are at the cabin that get left alone all winter, I go ahead and put a sheet of newspaper down on the top frames. I put the feeding shim on, and then I fill it all up with just white table sugar, except I leave a space so that they can get out through that entrance hole. And then I leave them for the whole winter. So that's insurance. Kathy, I muted you. So that's insurance that they'll have enough food. In town, then what I do is if they're pretty heavy, and how I determine if they've got 70 pounds-ish, is I'll go in the back, I'll grab the bottom, and then I'll lift up, and I'll see if I can pick the back up. And so if I can pick the back up easily, there's not nearly enough honey in there. And so then I'll add sugar here in town. So I'll use winter patties if it's in January or early February. But a lot of people will go ahead and just put candy boards on. And you can make candy boards, but I'll tell you, it's a whole lot easier. Just put a sheet of newspaper down, put the shim on, and pour sugar in, because it gets hard from the moisture in the air and from the bees exhaling, that you don't have to work hard to make candy boards. And then in the spring, when it warms up, then I just take whatever's left, stick it in a bucket, throw water in it, and then filter out the leftover newspaper. Let's see. Allie asks, 1 week ago, I checked, have uncapped frames that I'd like to pull off the hive, has lots of uncapped stores in 2 boxes. Below, how long do I wait or do I just leave it? So uncapped honey you can pull, but it'll probably ferment if it's got too much liquid in it. So what I do is I'll take the frame and I'll tip it parallel with the top of the hive, and I'll shake it really hard. And if liquid falls out on the top of the frames, then it's got too much water content in it, and I leave that. If I shake it really hard and nothing comes out, then you can extract that honey. It doesn't actually have to be capped.
Got a question?
Yeah.
So for the at Man Lake, they have 2 different options for insulation in the winter. One of it looked like sort of a shim, and then you had a spongy quilt that you put in it. And a second one looked just like a piece of compressed wood paper product or something that might expand if it got wet.
Yep.
Do you have a preference for those, or?
Kathy, you want to take this one? Here, I'll unmute you. No, you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I unmuted myself. I'm finally getting onto this. I never did see your slides, Tracy, but everything sounds really great. Those are boards that will absorb moisture, and it helps when there's a lot of condensation in the hive. I really like them, and it's just an extra thing that I throw on. Tracy's making me some moisture quilts this year, so I'm going to get a chance to try those. And I'm not going to put plastic around 3 sides of my hives like I've done in the past. That's worked really well, but I also have follower boards that create convection and pull the liquid down between the follower board and the inside of the hive body. The follower boards are in positions 1 and 10. So really I'm using a 10 frame box to have, you know, an 8 frame colony. But the moisture boards I think are worth it. Mine get absolutely drenched. Is that Brandy that asked the question?
It is.
Hi, Brandy.
Hi.
So Brandy, use the moisture boards or a quilt, not both.
Not both?
I don't think there's any reason to use both.
Oh, overkill is always good. Hey, Brandy, I got a question for you about yellow jackets. Did you have a lot of yellow jackets this year, or was it light?
Not too many this year.
Yeah, everybody I've talked to has not had, you know, yellow jackets like last year was insane. And I know you lost your bees because of that.
Yeah, I actually have gotten, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 between my traps, but that's about it.
Uh-huh. Well, good. I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear it.
So Eileen asked a follow-up question on the shims. How much sugar do you throw in that shim? At the cabin, I fill it up. Takes about 10 pounds or so, maybe a little bit more.
You're talking about dry sugar again, Tracy?
Yeah. I just fill it up, and I buy my sugar in 50-pound sacks. So I just hold it up and dump it in till it's full, but you don't have to put that much in. If you're going to be able to check your colonies more often, then there's no need to fill it up. I'd say maybe if your colony's heavy, right, in the fall, maybe half full. You can always add more, right? All right, so Brittany asks, I have been treating with Apigard and on week 4, but I'm seeing many more bees in the grass with what looks like paralysis. I was planning on checking mites again in 2 weeks after the full treatment. The mite count is still high. Do I treat again and with something different? So Brittany, I have a follow-up question. Did you do 2 treatments of Apigard 2 weeks or 10 days apart?
Yes, the answer is yes to that.
Okay. So yeah, it sounds like either the mite count was way too high when you started, or that it hasn't been as effective as you might want it to be. Did you put a shim above it so they had plenty of room to walk up and over and move it around?
I put on like a just a medium over it because I also put on sugar medium, feeding them. Yeah.
Okay, so you're actually not supposed to feed your bees when you use Apigard.
Oh, maybe that's my problem.
Maybe, but maybe not. So yeah, I don't know if I would wait the full 2 weeks because I just removed the Apogard. I get the big tub, so I removed the paper that I put it on this morning on most of mine, and it was gone after a week or so. So I would go ahead and, yeah, at least. When did you put it on, the last treatment?
I put it on a week ago. Or
I'd go ahead and do a mic check now.
Okay, I can do that. Thank you.
Yeah, and then the answer is yes, I would try something different because it doesn't seem like Apogard works so hot for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. See, scroll down here. Just one single sheet of newspaper, yes. Combining colonies. Bill asks, combining colonies. 1, is it essential to go through newspaper combining process? Yes. 2, can you combine more than 2 colonies into one? Example, double colonies. And the answer to that is yes.
Yes.
3, your thoughts about the various and odd number of frames that you end up with when combining hives. Which frames to keep, which ones? Oh, that's a great question. So it depends on what my colony needs. If I have extra frames that are drawn and they need extra drawn frames, then I keep those. If they need extra honey, then I keep those too. And any of them that are old and icky, then it's a good idea to freeze those and save them for a storm trap for next year, or to go ahead and just render the wax down and make candles out of those. Does that answer your question, Bill? Questions? Take that as a yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Oh, Bill, you've got another question in here. I get it. Apogard treatment, if weather cools before finishing, does the treatment continue but take longer? Yes. Usually the second treatment always takes a little bit longer. Okay, we put, Michael asks, we put Formicpro pads in for the 2-week treatment. Can we leave the used pads in place or should we remove them? You go ahead and take those out. I think that's all the questions in the chat. Is there anybody have any other questions? Bill, of course you have more questions. Go for it. Unmute yourself.
Okay. Once you pull the honey supers and extracted them, how long? I rather than leave them out in the yard, I put them on top of the individual hives, so I don't get a robbing frenzy going. But how long can you leave them on? Do they start to refill them, and you start ending up with partially filled honey supers when you're trying to actually have the bees clean them out?
Yeah, usually this time of year they won't refill them unless there's the third honey flow, as Jeff and I like to joke about. And that is somebody's colony next to yours dying and your bees go help themselves to all that honey. Then they might fill those if they need space, but they generally won't. And I usually find that after 2 or 3 days, they've cleaned those all out. They're nice and dry. And I wouldn't leave them on too long because this year, like I said, the wax moths have just been relentless, at least at my house. And so I pulled everything off and then I've been rotating them through my freezer.
Would you put those the ones that weren't completely clean just out in the yard to then have a bunch of bees and everybody else come and clean them out?
Yeah, I don't usually do that.
Okay.
Actually, Tracy, I do that because I have found that when I put the wet frames on top of the hives, it creates robbing from my own bees. And so I make sure that they go way far away from the hives and just let the bees rob it out and take it back to, all the hives. And I just found it really just cut down on all the individual robbing.
And I hate that because it attracts yellow jackets.
I know, but the yellow jackets weren't bad this year, so it was easy.
Okay, so I cannot tell a lie. I actually threw my supers in a big stack in my front yard this year too, and I hardly ever do that because I don't have any yellow jackets this year either. I had them early, but somebody must have killed them because I haven't seen any, and I got away with it this year. So usually, Bill, if you've got multiple colonies and you put the wet supers on your strongest colonies, then you're not going to have to worry about the smaller colonies robbing it.
Okay.
The year that I had the 10 colonies that all got robbed out, and I had surgery and I was watching it go on, and there was nothing I could do about it. It attracted the yellow jackets. So, I guess I'm gun shy about putting them on the hives.
Yeah. All right, so hi, Steve. Steve asked a question. Oops, his thing just moved. Reasoning behind brood down, honey up. Also, I have a 3 high colony. That means 3 deeps. Very strong. Must I get down to 2? So you don't have to get down to 2, although there's no reason not to get down to 2. The bees will fit. And you can, if I don't remember, Steve, if you treated, but if you haven't treated that hive and you want to go ahead and extract the extra honey, you can definitely do that. But there's no reason to overwinter colonies in 3 deeps. And the reason why you want the brood on the bottom and the honey up is that in the winter, the bees move up to the honey. If they have honey in the bottom and they are hungry, believe it or not, they will not go down to find it. They'll starve in that top box. So I give them a boost and I move all the honey up to the top and then put all the brood frames in the bottom. That forces the bees to start the winter in the bottom box instead of sometimes, like I said, they won't move down and they'll start in the top box and there'll be honey resources in the bottom that they won't go.
Good boy. Oh, my good boy.
I have a question.
Yep.
So you wouldn't even leave the 2 like frames on the outer sides of the brood box with honey in them, or would you?
On the bottom, yeah, you can do that. If you've got extra honey, you can put 2 frames of honey in the bottom box on the outsides, and then in the early fall they'll eat through that before Christmas and then start moving up.
Okay.
Usually I don't have that much, so.
I have a question.
Okay.
My husband and I would like to know when we stop doing hive inspections.
So you don't want to do a hive inspection after the temperatures are below 55. So you don't want to pull the frames out, look at them and do all that after it's below, average temps are below 55 degrees. However, what you do want to do is periodically through the winter is you want to crack the top open and look in if you don't have a IR camera and see where your bees are. And if there's no bees in the top, chances they're in one of the lower boxes. But if all the bees are clustered up in the top, that means they're out of food. And so you'll want to slide some food in there. That's why I like that feeding shim with the moisture quilt on top, because it's easy to just crack that open in the back, take a peek and put it back down and you're done. That's your inspection for the winter up until about February. And when I start adding pollen patties, so just crack, slide food in, close it up, you're done. And people have said that, hey, I heard that I'm not supposed to open my box up in the winter. But Rusty on her Honeybee Suite site has a really great article about that too. And she's like, what? Why would you not? It's, you think they're going to starve or they're going to die of cold. Well, they're not going to die of the cold, but they will die of starvation. So it's better to just give her a crack, look inside, add food or not, and you're done.
I think it's important that when you're going through winter that you do find out where they are, because if the honey that they got stored is a couple frames over, they may not even go over there to get the honey, and you want to move it right next to the cluster so it's easy for them to get.
Yep. I found that for beginning beekeepers, the fastest thing to do is to just go ahead and add sugar and then move those frames of honey around in the spring when it's a little bit warmer. So either way works. It's a little bit faster to just add the sugar and then deal with the honey later. Let's see. So the next, Rodney writes in the chat, I tried something experimental to me by putting the super frames in the hive upside down. It seemed to work. Bees cleaned the frames pretty fast. So I'm assuming, Rodney, what you did was you put them sideways or kittywampus so that they would actually fit.
Yes, I did. I put them in slightly diagonal, but upside down so they couldn't keep putting more honey into them.
Not a bad idea.
Yeah, tricky.
All right, Erica asks, since I'm a first-year beekeeper, I didn't plan to harvest honey, but after doing my oxalic acid treatments, I found quite a few full frames of honey beyond the 70 pounds. What should I do with these frames? Can I freeze them for reuse by the bees in the spring or just store in airtight? So oxalic acid is not licensed to use on frames of honey that are going to be consumed by humans. So the thing to do with those is either leave them on the colony itself, or if you've got room in your freezer, you can certainly put those in your freezer and then add them back as needed. So the winter, if they get light, and do like Kathy said, and just add those back as you need them, or just add them back in the spring. So if you want to just store them in an airtight container, I would freeze them first and then store them in the airtight container, because you don't know if there isn't wax moths in there. And they'll make a total mess. They'll destroy everything, and a couple days in the freezer, you'll be happy you did. People ask all the time, if I freeze my honey, will it crystallize? And if you store your honey in the garage where it's about 50, 55 degrees or colder, it crystallizes really fast. But for when you put it in the freezer, it doesn't crystallize at all. So I know several people that will extract all their honey and then they'll freeze it and then they'll bring it back up and warm it up for bottling. That way they know they won't end up with wax moths.
I have a question about winter space.
Yep.
Yeah, so right now I'm all in all westerns. I don't have any deeps, but all my westerns, or most of them, there isn't much going on in the bottom box. But there's really good pollen down there. There's a pollen right up next to the brood in the next box up, which I am reticent to remove. And I was thinking that it would also kind of create over the winter, it would give the bees sort of an insulation box, like a protection from the cold that comes in the bottom if I left it on. What do you think of that?
Well, the bees don't need to be warm in the winter. They just need to be dry. So actually, if it's just above freezing, they'll use less food. So I would probably just take those out, and then if you've got a couple frames of pollen you want to save, just move those up into the other box and empty spaces.
Okay.
Because you probably don't have full frames in all the other boxes, right?
Well, I would be taking honey frames out instead of pollen.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a trade that is tricky, and there isn't a lot of pollen. It's just that there isn't a lot of pollen in the hive right now at all. So I hate taking pollen.
Yeah, so I'd take that out and I'd move it up next and put it next to the brood, and then just take honey frames out. That way you don't have all that extra space.
And the other question is insulation on the side walls with honey. Isn't that an asset? You don't worry about brood right up next to the wall in the winter? Or it would only be.
There's no brood up next to because they're slowing down their laying right now.
Yeah.
And so really they'll be broodless by the end of October, middle of November anyway.
So it would just be space frames then at that point. It's not going to be.
Yeah, they'll usually fill those up.
Yeah, okay.
There's plenty of
So-
time for them to rob out other people's colonies still.
And then feeding to prevent the ivy honey, is that, what timing? Do you kind of watch for the buds on the ivy to
The
start?
ivy's blooming here.
It's blooming now.
Yeah,
Darn stuff.
I know, I hate it. So for
So-
those of you that don't know, ivy honey is stark white. It crystallizes almost immediately when the bees put it up, and it stinks to high heaven. I think it smells like cat pee. Kathy says it just smells awful. But the bees can't eat it in the winter because it's not wet enough, and they can't go out to get water. So a lot of people will feed their colonies now to keep the bees interested in the syrup instead of going to get that awful ivy honey, which, by the way, that you can put those back in, or move them towards the brood in the spring when they can go out to get water. And they seem to like it. I don't know why, but it does take them a long time to eat it.
And it's also good if you freeze them, if you're going to do splits, to put in to your splits in the springtime, because it's just instant food.
Yep.
They can get to water and they can rehydrate the crystallized honey. And they can have it.
Yeah, I don't know why people would eat that. It smells nasty. All right, so
No.
Bill asks, Bill, welcome back. If you aren't opening the hive regularly while feeding, is it possible to overfeed to the point that the bees start backfilling in the brood area? Yes. So once they've got 70 pounds of honey, there's really no need to keep feeding. I told this to Steve the other day. He's got plenty of honey in his. Remember, he's got 3 deeps going. So there's no need once they get up 70, 80 pounds of honey to keep feeding. Just save your money and buy Christmas presents, or yourself a treat instead. And then Bill also asks, is there any trick to feeding while also using ApiGuard? Yes, don't. If I've gotten too late to start with both processes. So I wouldn't feed during ApiGuard treatment. So if you're short in the end, just add table sugar on top, mountain camphor.
Okay.
Yeah.
In terms of the 70-pound weight, do you have some scale that you use, or is this just to pick it up and see what it feels like? Okay. And that's a cumulative 70 pounds, right?
Exactly. So honestly, what I do is I go behind the colony, I grab the bottom, and I pull up on the bottom. And if it feels heavy, then you don't need more. Kathy, for instance, when there's 70 pounds, no way can she pick that up. And I can pick it up, but I'm like, all right, that's plenty. And then you just have to, if you go to pick it up and it scoots practically off your hive stand, you need to feed them.
Okay.
You can also, take a look at the arches over the brood, and if you got deeps, you might have 5 pounds of honey on every frame. So that's a good way to judge by looking at it.
Right. So a full deep averages about 10 pounds of honey, and a full medium frame is around 4 pounds.
Okay.
Out to the edge of the wood is about 4 pounds and 10 pounds respectively.
But if you've got brood in there, you probably only got about 5 pounds in the arch.
Yeah, maybe. Depends on how big the arch is, right?
Right.
Will the bees, if the bees are building up their winter brood, and they got a late start, because I tried a sequestration process, and I think I started.
Oh, right.
Is it will they keep raising brood till they have a sufficient amount, and so that's when they cut off, or do they cut off when the temperature gets to a certain point?
Well, as the daylight gets less and less, that's actually the cue to the queen to slow down her brood laying. So you can artificially manipulate that a little bit by adding pollen patties. But it becomes a problem when there's fewer and fewer bees to keep it warm enough in there and keep all that brood warm.
I see. Okay.
So Brian asks, if it looks like hives already have over 70 pounds of honey, can there be problems with leaving too much? No, not really. Julie asks, why do you feed your bees sugar shake instead of saving enough product to feed them through the winter, is raw sugar better than white sugar? So the first question is, why do you feed your bees and not take your supers off earlier? That's the age-old human question, right? Humans are greedy. We want lots of honey. So yes, it is better to leave the bees with natural honey, but if you didn't, or if they didn't build up enough on their own, because some colonies don't, then it's time to add syrup. And then raw sugar is actually bad. So you don't want to use raw sugar or molasses because the bees have to hold their poop. Yeah, they have to hold their poop, and there's a lot of ash content in that. And so they get dysentery by eating that because they can't go out to go to the bathroom enough.
I have a question about, I sort of know the answer, but it'd be fun to talk about the idea of taking bees from a hive where there's just so much brood and giving it to a smaller hive this time of year. What do you think of that?
Equalizing.
Yeah, you can totally do that. I should have talked about that.
It makes
It's
me
a
nervous.
good idea.
Well, it's like they've built up beautifully and you're possibly weakening them at a time when you want them strong and.
Well, so let's do a caveat that if both those colonies are healthy appearing, then adding brood from one to another is not a bad idea. It helps the weaker colony, and believe it or not, it actually helps the stronger colony too, because then they have fewer bees to feed over the winter.
And that could be a part of bringing your box number down, is actually taking some frames of bees.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Jessica asks, apologies if I missed this. If we've been feeding pollen due to the pollen dearth in late summer, when do we stop for the winter? Now. So they should have plenty of pollen, and you want them to stop raising more brood, too much brood right now, because the more bees there are, like we mentioned with Kit, the faster they eat through their stores. So if you have a huge colony, you think, woohoo, I'm set. But those are actually the most likely colonies to starve in February and March because they had too many bees to feed. And it's also why I mentioned at the very beginning why I prefer carniolan bees to Italians up here, because the Italians go into the winter with a bigger cluster and they try to overwinter more bees. And so they blow through their food and they tend to starve more often than carniolans that will actually reduce down to a cluster even just this big. But then the cool thing about carniolans in the spring is they go and they build up really fast. The tricky thing is you do have to stay ahead of their space requirements in the spring so they don't swarm.
I have a question. My husband and I are treating with Apogard right now, but we didn't know. Yeah, we finished the treatment yesterday. We didn't know we weren't supposed to feed the bees, so we fed them. So is it going to affect our bees in a harmful way?
50 lashes with a wet noodle.
Ouch, that hurt.
It says not to feed them. In desperate situations, I have fed them too. I think there's more bee mortality when you do feed with the Apogard on, but there's nothing you can do about it now, so don't worry about it.
Well, good to know going forward. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, you're not supposed to feed with Formic Pro either.
Right. And Formic Pro is not in the label, but one of my colleagues in my master's class called the manufacturer and asked, and they said that in their trials there was a higher bee mortality when they fed the colonies as opposed to the ones that didn't.
What about oxalic?
Oxalic is just a quick treatment, so you're fine. Now, I'm not a fan of treating oxalic acid weekly. I've read a bunch of stuff on Randy Oliver's site and others, and it's not terribly effective. And it's not without harm. So I think that really that's best used in broodless periods. And when you do that, it's about 97 or 8% effective, and you only treat once. So I think that, you know, like when you pick up a swarm, hive them and let them start raising brood and treat with oxalic acid before they have any capped brood, or in the fall, like late October, early November when there's no brood. All right, Kelly, you have your hand raised.
I have a question about robbing. Are you?
Go ahead, Kelly.
I had a whole box full of honey, 8 frames absolutely stuffed full of honey. And a week later, when I went to draw it out, it was empty. All the honey was gone.
You asked this last month, Jeslyn.
And what was the answer then?
The same as it's going to be now.
Is there some other bees are robbing?
Maybe, or they moved it down.
No, it's not, wasn't anywhere in the hive.
So they ate it, and somebody else probably robbed it out.
So it'll be other honeybees robbing?
Yes. Yeah. Do you have another stronger colony in your apiary?
There were six boxes, 3 of us in the same yard, and my hive is very strong, and they were all robbed.
So my humble recommendation is, if you didn't use robbing screens, to use them next year, and that'll cut that way back.
I had robbing screens. I did.
Oh.
Oh.
All right. New messages. Here we go. Eileen asks, I have a deep brood box, but a Western on top. Will they potentially not have enough food? So Eileen, did they have honey in the deep too?
Well, I haven't checked just recently, but they were having a hard time crossing one of the frames that they just didn't like.
Oh, those plastic frames that you talked about.
It's hard, like, you know, I kind of chickened out yesterday in doing an inspection because there was so much honey in the top box. I felt like I, you know, like attract every yellow jacket in the county if I took it off. And they were so angry. They had like guard bees out there with their bums up.
Yeah, because there's people trying to steal their honey right now.
Started smoking. Well, and then one of them like stung me on the scalp the other day, and then ran after Higgs and scalped and like bit and like stung him too. Like they're just like pissy right now.
Yes,
yeah. All of them would be.
Hey, and so Tracy, I want to talk to you after this is over, so let's text.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as far as your question, Eileen, I would pick the back of the box up and see how heavy it feels. So if the Western is full, for those of you that don't know the terminology, Western is the same as a medium box. So if that box is totally full with 10 frames of honey, it should weigh around 40 pounds. And then you probably have arches in your deeps in the brood box. So I just pick up the back and see how it feels. You know, and when in doubt, just put a feeding shim on top like I've got and add sugar.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I kind of have a long shaggy dog question.
This is a bee forum.
A long shaggy bee question.
There you go.
So late in the season, I had my weakest. I had 3 colonies. The weakest one kept trying to raise a queen, and I finally decided to. Okay, they really want to raise a queen. Maybe they're trying to supersede her, so I let them. And the day the queen was about ready to release, the hive swarmed. I captured the swarm in a nuke, and then I waited for the new queen to mate, and she successfully mated and started laying. Then I got the crazy notion that I would try something, since I have 3 hives. tried something random. What I did was I created a Palmer hive, basically split hive, and put both queens in the hive. They seem to be doing fairly well, but I'm just wondering, is there any extra consideration I need to do for getting them ready for winter?
So you have a true Palmer nuke with it's like a townhouse, right? With two colonies side by side.
What I did was I took one of my deep fruit frames, I put a split bar down the center of it so they couldn't get through, and then I built two miniature deeps to put on top of them. So it's a 5-frame box, but you can't really quite fit 5 frames in there. So it's got 4 frames in it, and I've just been keeping up with making sure they're not building in that extra area. And then the second one that goes on top of that, those are just a little bigger than 4 frames, but not big enough for 5 frames either. And then they're basically their apartments are right next to each other.
Right. So I run a whole bunch of those. I love them. A tip on the extra space in the bottom: if you put a double divider in the bottom, then they don't draw as much.
I thought about trying to figure out how to do that. Okay.
Yeah, so all you have to do is take that, unless you glued it in, just take that first divider out and make another one and put them in side by side so it makes the bottom box. So I run 4 frames in the bottom and 3 frames in the top with a internal feeder. So I overwinter 7-frame colonies all the time. They're awesome. You do have to watch the food though and make sure that they don't starve. So it does take some more maintenance in the winter. And then I actually use the moisture quilt that I showed everybody. If you notice, there was a piece of wood right down the center. That way I only have to make one kind of moisture quilt, and I can put it on any of my colonies, a full size or a Palmer, and that board down the middle serves as a divider. So you just put that moisture quilt right on the top, and then I've got big fat inner covers that I actually bought from, I think, Better Bee, that you can put candy inside that too. And so you just have to be more careful with the food requirement.
Okay, great. So I built a quilt box that basically it's 2 quilt boxes that sit on top, and I was planning on building 2 shims to put on top for feeding. But that gives me a little bit of confidence.
Yeah.
My other 2 hives have Russian queens, and this particular hive has 2 Italian queens. So we'll see which does.
Well, good luck.
Thank you. Again, I have a silly question. Does anybody else name their queens?
Oh, yeah.
Kathy and I did 2 cutouts at a church one time, and we asked the pastor if the kids wanted, in the Sunday school, wanted to name the queen, and she said, no, just name her Jezebel.
Mine are Jesus bees.
Jesus bees.
Yeah.
Mine are named after the Russians are named after Russian queens, and the Italians are named after Italian queens.
There you go.
Raise your hand if you name your queens.
I don't know how to raise my hand.
There's a little icon at the top.
You can tell the low tech and the high tech people. So yes, at least 4 other people name their queens.
My wife thinks I'm nuts.
No, if I get a swarm, I name it after the person that called me. So I've got the Eric bees, and
sometimes if there's kids, when I pick up swarms, I ask them if they want to name the queen, and then I send a picture with a box that I put them in with the queen's name on tape on the front. They really like that.
It's hard to keep track of queen names when you have a lot of hives. I just name the boxes.
I'm really original. I number mine.
I have a combination, naming them by what kind of queen they are. And then, if I make daughters out of that, then they become A, B, C, and D. So if it's Italian, it would be an I and then A, B, C, and D, or Russian as an R and A, B, C, and D.
No Beyonce's out there.
Brian names his Dr. Seuss names, thing 1, thing 2. Jessica says, my hives are named after the Fellowship of the Ring Queens, named accordingly. I like it.
Okay, so I'm not totally nuts.
No, it's
Yeah.
okay.
Or we're
It's
all
really
nuts
okay.
together.
What?
All right, if you were raising your hand because you name your queens, if you could lower your hands, that's awesome. Otherwise, we'll call on you because we think you have a question.
Okay, I'm really stupid and I don't understand the computer. And how do you raise your hand other than this?
I'll show you later.
Okay. Help me, Tracy. I'm low tech. What can I say?
All right, we know that. That's why we love you.
Oh, good.
Ellie's typing. Ellie, you want to just tell us what your question is?
Myrtle.
I was just saying that I caught
Nice.
the one on Myrtle Street, so that one is named Myrtle.
There you go.
And I'm not Allie, I'm Tina, but you know, I guess my
I'm like,
daughter has the. Yeah,
you look a lot like Tina.
Hold on. So I have a question about robbing and doing refeeding the bees. What I've found is my bees are extremely lazy and they won't touch a frame that still has capped honey on it. They'll rob out any frame that is empty or that is uncapped. But if I missed one in uncapping it or whatever, they'll leave it alone. Is that normal or are they just really lazy?
They're just not very hungry.
Well, you know what I do in the wintertime, because the bees don't actually have a tongue that can pierce the capped honey when it's cold, is I take my hive tool and I slice some, some lines through it so they can actually get to the honey. You know, when they're out, and you see them like on peaches that have hit the ground, they couldn't pierce the peach skin. It's the yellow jackets that do it, and then the honeybees can move in and take advantage of it. So it was just kind of a, hey, well, I should be, piercing the honey so that they can get it in the wintertime, and it works really well.
Thank you.
I have never heard that they don't like to get their own cappings undone. What the heck?
It's really hard in the wintertime. It's so cold, and the honey's usually on the outskirts. It's not right next to the cluster, which they can keep 93 degrees easily. But the honey's always on the edges. And so it becomes difficult for them. And an old timer, now I'm the old timer, but back in 18 years ago, an old timer told me, well, just scratch up the capped honey and they can get right to it. So I do.
Why don't
Maybe the other question came into the chat, my obnoxious child behind me. Does anyone have experience with a large area reaction to bee stings, and are they precursor to a full anaphylactic reaction? I'm going to punt that one to your physician or allergist. We got a similar question last time. It's really best to just ask that of your physician.
I cry a lot.
The best thing when you get a bee sting is just to grab ice. Ice makes a big difference how fast you can get it on the sting.
Well, get the stinger out right away.
Yeah, get stinger out, obviously, and then ice.
If you can heat it to 51 degrees Celsius or 124 degrees Fahrenheit quickly enough, it actually breaks down the proteins in it, and that helps some people.
Oh, wow.
There's actually a device you can buy from Germany that is used for bee stings and mosquito bites that does that. A lot of people find that that's too uncomfortable of a temperature for them.
Yeah,
I actually find that I find that it actually helps. I experimented with it recently because I don't have a huge reaction, but I do have a large swelling reaction local, and it seems to work.
My reaction depends on where I get stung. And
Yes.
since I don't wear a veil or a suit, you know, it's like I don't get stung very often, but it's usually when I make a mistake and put my finger on a bee.
Exactly.
I think the important thing here is what does a large reaction mean? If it's a large reaction at the site of the sting, that doesn't necessarily indicate that it's a precursor to anaphylaxis. But if you have a large reaction and it's beyond the site of the sting, perhaps it's on the opposite limb, or you have a rash, you know, spreading, or you're having something else like you're feeling short of breath, or, you know, that does
911. Yeah.
Anaphylaxis. If you have just a large rash on one limb, that would be considered more of a local reaction and not a true anaphylactic reaction.
Most people will say, I'm allergic to bee stings. You know, we all have a reaction, but anaphylactic is truly different.
You get the systemic response, and
right.
And I don't know what's going on with you, Melody, but if that's the case, you should probably go in and get your allergist to take a look at you. I'm an emergency doc, so.
I had teaching a class one time down in California, and I had a doctor as one of my students, and then another older fella. He was a smoker and a little bit overweight, and he had a full suit on, really hot weather, and he got stung by a bee and stood up and then passed out. And so, you know, I'm screaming, call 911 to my ex-husband who was there, and the doctor and I were trying to determine whether or not he was having a reaction to heat, if he was just dehydrated, or if it was truly a reaction to the bee sting. And he had absolutely no trouble breathing and no trouble talking. But as soon as he would sit up, he'd pass out. And 911 came, and the first thing they did was give him Benadryl, and then took him to the hospital and you know, watched him for a while. But he had to give up bees because it was obviously anaphylactic.
Jeff, you're on mute. Jeff, you're still muted.
That double mute. Get you every time, doesn't it? We had that happen. We've had this happen in the apiary a few years ago, where it was a hot day and some guy was standing around in his bee suit, and the next thing you know, we all heard a thud, and we, you know, we're all in the hives, and we turn around, and the guy's laying on the ground, and we didn't know what happened. We called, you know, 911. They sent a paramedic, and then we had to help carry him out of the apiary so the paramedics could look at him, because they didn't want to go next to all the hives and everything. So
chicken.
But yeah, I guess it was that was actually heat. It wasn't a bee sting at all. But we often, I think people forget to be drinking water when they're in the apiary to begin with, and it's really easy to get dehydrated.
Well, this is a very nice group to be a part of. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, who is that? Who just talked?
It's Rodney.
Rodney. Hi, Rodney.
Melody, do you have a question?
Well, it's not really a question. It was just more to say thank you for all of the information on the bee sting. I would be heartbroken if I had to give up my bees. I did have a large reaction. The sting was on the web part of my hand between my thumb and my forefinger, but my entire forearm swelled up. And the next day it was traveling up past my elbow. So I did go to called the doctor, since we can't go during COVID, and did get some medication. And so I haven't gotten an allergy test yet, but I have been at my bees again wearing gloves, because I usually don't wear gloves. But it's kind of made me a little bit fearful.
Sure.
I've never been fearful of the bees ever, which is why I don't wear gloves. But have heard, or I've been seeing conflicting reports on my research online, that some sites say yes, this can be a precursor to an anaphylactic reaction, and some say no, it not necessarily is. So I didn't know if anybody else had had the same or similar experience with just a really, really bad reaction, and then it turned into anaphylactic. Because I can handle the bad reaction. I just don't want to have to go to emergency.
Yeah, to me, it always depends on where I get stung. If it's the eye, I know I'm going to swell. If it's the ears, I know I'm going to swell. Now, I get stung on my hands, and half an hour later, I can't tell you where I got stung. But before I was a beekeeper, I had like ridiculous reactions to them. So I think that as time has gone on, I've had less of a reaction to bee stings. But anytime you start getting an increased reaction every time you get stung, I think that's a good time to ask the doctor to, give you a test and make sure that you have a EpiPen on hand. And
yeah, this was just about my 5th sting, and I hadn't had any other severe reaction. This is the first one that's ever done that. So I guess just going and getting that allergy test is the best option.
It also depends on how fast you can get the stinger out.
I felt it right away, and I scraped it, but I didn't even, and within, like you said, within, half an hour, I didn't even, I couldn't have told you I was stung, but it was about 3 hours later working in the garden in the hot sun. And I didn't even know until I pulled my gloves off that my hand was almost double its size. So it was kind of a little confusing.
I read on, I can't remember which site it was today, but someone said about putting an onion on a sting. Has anybody heard about that? And what would the onion do? What kind of chemical reaction would it create to, stop you from having reaction?
I've heard of it, but I think that theory is pretty much the same as putting baking soda on it. I think I'm not a doctor, but my wife's a nurse, and she just always tells me to take some Benadryl if I'm having a reaction of any kind, and then we talk to the doctor. Yeah, I see a thumbs up from Allie.
So Tina, one of the questions on the chat now is, do you keep an EpiPen around just in case?
I think the best thing is just to go to the allergist and get tested. You're going to need a prescription for that EpiPen anyway. Having Benadryl around is a terrific idea. A lot of people might choose to have an EpiPen if they can get a prescription for that, just in case they have visitors or some type of a mishap. So it's something to think about. I think it would be a great idea to have some Benadryl around and a cell phone. But if you feel like you need an EpiPen, you need to see an allergist first.
Yep.
Yeah, I have liquid Benadryl gel, and I'll usually put that on just immediately, and it really helps. I think the more you start itching and all of that, the worse it gets. It kind of spreads it around. So.
Kathy, you're so full of BS. I've seen you get lit up with stings, and you just go, damn.
I'm a crazy beekeeper. What can I say?
I do that all the time. She says, I'm like, no, you don't. You send me pictures, like all swollen up, a good stung today.
Yeah, I got those, that's for sure.
She has a walking trail by her house, and people walk by her house, and I'm out there in my bee suit, and she's out there in flip-flops, a tank top, and shorts, and they're like, is there something wrong with this picture? I'm not. Yeah, she's nuts.
Yep.
And they never not hurt, as many times as I've been stung, when you get it, it's just like, it's like being stuck by a needle every time.
Yeah.
Ones in the hand, in the palm of the hand, hurt a lot more than the ones in the back of the hand. I'll tell you that much.
Oh yeah, and I forget who it was that talked about in the web. Those are acupressure points, and I think when you get stung in those kind of areas, it's just really, really tender, and your body reacts to it.
Yeah. Melody, do you have another question?
Nope.
Your hand's still
Oh,
up.
I gotta lower my hand here. Okay. Oh, did I can't tell if I'm raising or lowering my hand.
It's all good. Jeff, I think that might be it.
Yeah, I see a lot of people have left. That was really good, Tracy. I appreciate all your work putting this together, and I'm glad that we had a good turnout today, and I hope people learned a lot, and I'm sure that they did, because you're really good, Tracy. Yay!
I'll pay you later.
Thank you, Tracy.
See you guys.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Happy beekeeping.
Have a good night, everybody. Thank you, Tracy.